Let's just take you back to Immingham docks. There's the scene right now. The raw materials having arrived to keep the blast furnaces alight at Scunthorpe's steel plant. We are expecting the coking coal to be unloaded from that ship and transported to the site today. The business secretary is heading up to Scunthorpe to oversee that process, and we do expect to hear from him a little bit later in the morning. But in the meantime, I can talk now to former British diplomat in China and director of the Lao China Institute at King's College London, Professor Kerry Brown. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning. I wonder what you've made of what's happened over the last few days and whether or not you think the experience over the Scunthorpe steel plant with the government having to move in to take control should make us rethink our relationship with Chinese investment in this country at all?
Well, I mean, it's something we've been rethinking for a long, long time. 10 years ago, we were pretty embracing of Chinese investment. If you remember, there was a $6 billion equity investment into Hinkley Point nuclear station. Then things didn't go very well. The pandemic caused big political ructions. The first Trump administration had its initial trade war with China. And so we kind of had a big rethink about what type of Chinese investment we've had. The current government, since it came to power, is more pragmatic in some ways and has tried to embrace more trade and investment links with China. But it's always been a very difficult relationship. There's differences in how we view, kind of values, business, general kind of strategies. So, there's always these kind of hiccups. And to be absolutely honest, there isn't a massive amount of Chinese investment in UK. It's about 0.2% of our overall stocks of foreign investment here. And if you think, the Chinese economy is the second largest in the world, a fifth of global GDP, that is a real kind of imbalance, a big economy, but it's not very active in Britain.
Well, yeah, and the areas that those who are concerned are particularly focused on are sort of key infrastructure projects, aren't they? And while the business secretary has talked about having a very high trust bar when it comes to awarding contracts in these kind of projects, there are some, even senior Labour figures, who are raising concerns around security, and some are calling for a kind of review of those companies already operating in this country. What do you make of that? Is that a good idea?
Well, I mean, we do have a review mechanism, and I mean, it's been used. Most of the Chinese investment that's come before, hasn't had a problem. I mean, I think the issue is that the Chinese companies are more capitalist in some ways than, foreign companies, British companies. I mean, they just look at the bottom line. I don't think there's anything particularly about sabotage or malevolence in this investment. I don't think that was the Chinese plan. That there isn't a file in Beijing saying, how do we bring down the British economy? But there is a file that says you've got to make really, really good money, and the spreadsheet has to look right. I mean, you can't have it awash with red. I think the Chinese don't really, kind of buy into investing with a sort of larger kind of, social welfare program. I mean, they're not very expert at that. They just look at, does this make money? And if it doesn't, we're getting out. I mean, it's not particularly pleasant, but you can't say that it isn't sort of, it's driven by very, very, very commercial attitudes in a weird way. And those are sometimes pretty brutal.
Well, yes, and the government, just in the last few months, have done various trips with various ministers to China in the hope of boosting trade and investment to try and boost economic growth here. Do you think that Chinese companies would actually be put off by what's happened at the Scunthorpe plant, seeing a Chinese company pushed out of the way and the government coming in and taking control?
I think Chinese companies are very wary about Britain, in the last few years. 10 years ago, I think it was a slightly different story, but I think they do know it's not easy. And there's been lots and lots of cases. I mean, 20 years ago, a Chinese company took over the MG Rover car manufacturing company, and that didn't go particularly well. I mean, this is, alas, not a new story, although it's in a different sector. Look, I mean, the kind of problem is that the world's second biggest economy, 1.4 billion people, middle class of 500 million, they're a potential market for British services where we probably do much better. We can't really ignore that market. I mean, we can walk away from it, but we're having problems with obviously the Americans at the moment. We're having problems in Europe. And so, it's an opportunity cost. We can say no to China, but then we don't get any kind of real benefits from it. And with a very sluggish economy at the moment, massive issues in our own economy, we have to think quite deep about what we say no to, because, it's going to have a disproportionate impact if we say no to
Okay.
the wrong thing.
Well, Professor Kerry Brown, really fascinated to get your take on events, and with all your expertise, we really appreciate it. Thanks so much. We just have about a minute to go before we must say goodbye, but let's go back to Shingi Mararike, who's at Immingham Docks right now. And Shingi, remind us what's going to happen later this morning.
Well, the process of bringing those vital raw materials to Scunthorpe has begun here at Immingham. You can see a crane that is going to move 40,000 tons of coal from New Orleans onto a transporter, a hopper system, and then it will be put onto trains and wagons taken to Scunthorpe. And what the government are hoping is the beginning of a process to secure the short-term future of British steel. And that process is beginning here at Immingham before the materials are moved further inland to Scunthorpe shortly.
OK, Shingi, I know you'll keep an eye on events there. The business secretary heading up there as well, so we're likely to hear from him later on. And the questions will continue about what next after this immediate crisis at the plant seems to be averted. Do stay tuned. Lots coming.
load the raw materials. The government's taken control of British Steel and is facing a race against time to get materials such as coking coal and iron ore to the site. The Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds is expected to visit the port in Immingham in North Lincolnshire today, as supplies from these two ships are unloaded and transported to the plant. Well, let's take a moment to remind you of the key moments of the last few days. Last Friday, Sir Keir Starmer announced Parliament would be recalled to pass emergency legislation to secure Scunthorpe's future. On Saturday, MPs and members of the House of Lords returned from their Easter break to vote on the legislation to save the plant. Yesterday, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, said the government was confident they had the raw materials and that the furnaces in Scunthorpe would continue to operate. Today, those raw materials due to arrive at the steel plant from the Port of Immingham, which means the furnaces won't have to shut down. There had been fears the furnaces would be closed in May if these raw materials were not paid for and delivered on time. Well, our North of England correspondent, Shingi Marike, joins us on the phone now from Immingham, where the materials are arriving. What more can you tell us? Has the unloading started?
Good morning, Gareth. So those raw materials are yet to come into view, but what you are seeing is the beginning of an incredibly intricate mechanical process in which we understand 40,000 tonnes of coke coal, part of that process of keeping those furnaces firing at Scunthorpe, will be taken off of a boat by that crane you can see in shot and then put onto grabs in increments of around 16 to 18 tonnes each, then put onto a conveyor belt, put into mounds and eventually stacked and taken to Scunthorpe Steelworks, both via train and lorry, which gives you a sense as to the amount of coke coal we are dealing with. And just here as well, you just get a sense as to the scale of the operation from the sound of the mechanics whirring and the movement and the buzz. We've driven past several mounds of coal and several more mounds are here to come. And I just want to ground this story in the community we're in. 21 miles inland is Scunthorpe, a town which really has steel in its bones. Thousands of people employed by the steelworks, and the emergency legislation that was pushed through by the government was greeted warmingly by that community. But what we have now is a process that the government will hope doesn't just symbolise securing the short-term future, but also begins more shipments coming in. And we understand that as well as this coal coming in from New Orleans, we're expecting shipments later on over the coming few weeks, also coming from Australia as well. One thing I think is worth mentioning is that this is just a shipment of that coal. Another vital component needed in keeping those furnaces firing is also iron ore. Iron ore is not here today, so there will be questions asked around that for sure when the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, arrives. But what we do have is what the government sees as the start of a process to secure the short-term future of the steelworks in Scunthorpe.
Shingi, what sense do you get amongst the community there of an element of relief, of pleasure that this is underway, of the government's level of support, of societal support?
Well, this weekend we extensively covered not just what was happening on the Green Benches of Parliament, but we also were in Scunthorpe. Some of my colleagues were there talking to the community there who felt that securing the steelworks is vital because it's not just a place that employs thousands of people, but that money also helps prop up the local economy. And here on the ground in Immingham, which is about 20 miles away by car, the staff here who work for British Steel there's a kind of quiet sense of anticipation that this goes ahead and that it goes ahead smoothly and that all of the machinery used as part of this operation works. And there is so much of it. Like I said, there are several cranes, there are grabbers, there are conveyor belts, and then there will be transport as well to take it back to Scunthorpe, where a community are hoping that this can help kickstart an industry and an employer which definitely still has an uncertain future.
We will follow its future and the developments of today closely here on Sky News. Shingi, for the moment, thank you so much. That is the live image there at the port of Immingham. We'll bring you plenty more from Immingham and Scunthorpe throughout the course of the day here on Sky News.